Hi, this is Zoe with my dog Dexter from fabulous Las Vegas, and you're listening to Bad Dog Agility, where the naughty dogs train.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 10.
Today's training tip will put the dog biscuit back in your agility. And in the second half of the show, we'll discuss using a clicker during sequencing.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Advil Agility, specializing in health and wellness, weight management, vibrant energy, and sports performance for the human half of your agility team.
Advil Agility is run by Janae Cunningham, a fellow competitor who understands the demands of agility competition. Visit Janae at advilagility.com. That's ADVO agility.com. There will also be a link to her site on our podcast page.
So, with today's training tip, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use food as a reward in your agility training.
Yeah, that sounds funny for you to say that, using food in dog training. I mean, everybody uses food in dog training.
Well, you say that, but actually, a lot of times people don't use food very often in their agility training once they get past the individual obstacle stage. So when you go out to your yard and you're doing sequencing, or you go to a class and you're doing a sequencing, most people do not use food in those situations.
I think a lot of trainers are really focused on using a toy to generate tug drive and really tug with their dogs. You know, we've been told that it's a great interactive game. It's a way to build drive, and the tug itself is very, very useful. You know, you can throw it way out ahead of the dog. You can have your friend throw it, and it's just a pretty handy thing to have. And agility's been moving in that direction for several years.
Well, I 100% agree with that. And I absolutely view tugging as the best reinforcer for a dog in agility for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. But if your dog doesn't like it, it's not a reward. And so when I talk about using food as a reward for sequencing, I'm talking about using food as a treat for the dog that when you throw a toy, they watch it fly through the air, watch it land, and then look back at you. That dog isn't going to get anything out of using tug as a reward. And so in those situations, I would start breaking out food.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think now's as good a time as any to bring food back. You know, the holy grail has been tugging and tugging with your dog, and I think it's okay to use food. And part of what has made me think that is we've got a dog right now, and she doesn't really like to tug. You know, she loves to have toys, and she loves to carry it around in her mouth, but she's really not into the tugging interaction itself. You know, I'm not sure if it's that she's a little soft and, you know, I'm 6 feet tall and very scary looking, or
that's true.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't know what it is, but I know that she has tremendous food drive, and, you know, she'll work for food. So why not use it?
There's a couple of things about working with food that people need to think about or be aware of. Number one is you can't always feed from the hand. That's really the big problem with food, is that most people feed from the hand, and in agility, the placement of reward is very important. And most of the time, we want to be rewarding the dog on their lines. So they take a sequence, and we want the reward to come out in front of them to create that drive. And when you're using food, that can be hard. But what we've done with our dogs is we use big hunks of food and we throw it in the field, in the yard. We try to use something that doesn't break up very much. We might use a quarter of a hot dog, or a whole biscuit, or a third of a string cheese, something like that, something that's visible, something that doesn't break up, and something that the dog can chase after on that line.
Yeah, I totally agree. To back up just a little bit, you know, it's not a crime to use food instead of a tug toy. The issue is, how are you using that food? And you can make the exact same mistakes with a tug toy that you can with food. And you're right, the number one mistake that people make is they're always taking the food out of their pocket, and they're always doing it after the sequence is entirely done. So let's say your dog takes 1, 2, 3 jumps, and they're done. They start trotting back towards you, and they kind of sit in front of you, and by the time they sit in front of you, now you've finally been able to fish some food out of your pocket or take your Tug Toy out and give it to your dog. And really, that reward's coming far too late. That reward needs to be out there and to the dog as they're taking that final obstacle. And it needs to be very immediate, and that delay is not a good thing. So when you're using food, I think you need to have it out and ready. And like you said, having a piece that's going to be visible so they're not rooting around in the ground, I think is important. And I use it like a toy. So I will wad up a piece of Biljack and, even 2 or 3 pieces and have some in both hands. This way, whatever hand happens to be closest to the dog when they're finishing the obstacle, I'll throw it out of that hand. Or, I know which side the dog is going to end up on, which hand I'm going to end up throwing from. And so, I plan the sequence out in advance, and then I can throw that toy out ahead of me. This way the dog learns to drive forward as we're finishing certain sequences. So they're not always slowing down, curling back toward me, and coming to get their food reward. And you'll see this on course too, as people finish a course. How many times have you seen a great run, and then the dog drops the last bar, the handler slows up, the dog curls in towards them. Sometimes, the handler isn't even slowing up, and that's just a reinforcement history, hundreds of repetitions where the dog finishes something, they come to the handler because that's where they get the food. And if you just take your food and you throw it out ahead of them on their path and straight line, you can really teach them a little bit of independence, drive forward, and it's a great thing for when you're working on the acceleration skill.
And obstacle focus, too. You need a balance between handler focus and obstacle focus. And when you're always training from hand, you are constantly reinforcing handler focus. And you need that obstacle focus, too. The one thing that I do recognize as I think about how we've used food is that it doesn't work very well for your little dogs. We've been running, a Rottweiler for one, and I have never seen that dog satisfied. So I can take, huge hunks of food and get all of my training done, and she's driving for the last treat as hard as she was driving for the first. Now, if you have a Papillon, you're going to fill them up fast, and the size of food that we're throwing to make it visible might be all of the treats that you give that dog in a day. So that doesn't really work. With these little dogs, you'll have to be more creative. I did think of a time that I had a student whose dog didn't really like to tug, and he would come out with a Tug Toy and a jar of peanut butter, and he would slather peanut butter on his Tug Toy, and then he would throw the Tug Toy at the end of the sequence. The dog really didn't care about the toy, but the dog liked the peanut butter, so he'd run after the toy and pick it up and then lick a little peanut butter off of it. So you could be creative if you have a little dog.
Yeah, and when you're using food, I really do like to use it as a Tug Toy. So I'll throw it ahead of me just like I would a Tug Toy if I want the dog to accelerate forward. If I want the dog to come in toward me, I will reward it from my hand, but I'm not going to sit there, wait for them to come, sit in front of me, fish it out of some bag, and then take the food and give it to them and, put it in their mouths. What I'm going to do is as they come in toward me, I might even run away from them, have the food in my palm, moving away from them so that they have to drive even faster to come in and really take that food out of my hand. There's nothing really polite about it. I want them to think of that food as prey that's going to get away if they don't get there. And that's how I use it to build drive and agility.
Even though our tip is to use food in your agility training, and I think that it can be done, I think that it's something that you do while you are also working on that tug drive. Because even with all of these tips that we've given you, it is still more difficult to work with than a tug. So it doesn't replace the tug. It's just something that you can use while you're working towards that holy grail of perfect tug drive and perfect retrieve. At least that's what I think.
Right. Well, we've talked a little bit about having food as a reward either on you, on your person, from your hand, or throwing it out ahead of the dog, in particular maybe at the end of a sequence. But another way you can do it is as a target. And I like to use the dinner bowl because they have such a strong history there in association with the dinner bowl. And we used to do this with the Rottweiler. You go to the end of your weave poles, you let the dog see you pouring in half of their dinner into that bowl. It makes that very satisfying clinking sound, and you have someone holding them up at the start of the weaves, You'll rev them up and then you let them go, and you can get some really tremendous drive. And I saw a lot of improvement in the weave poles from that Rottweiler, and it's really amazing what that can do when you take their dinner, divide it up into 2, 3, 4 portions, and say, I'm going to do 4 repetitions every day of some straight line weaves, just to really build up speed and value for the weave poles. You're transferring the value that they have for their dinner to the weave poles, and that's another great way to use food. Now, a warning is if you have the food out there and let's say they pop pole number 10 and you were working by yourself, no one's there guarding the food, and they get to the food, that's your mistake. They get to eat that food. You cannot run over there and be like, no, 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 leave it, smacking them on the head, that sort of thing, because you're going to really make an unpleasant association for
They're
it.
no longer going to drive for that food. They're going to start to be afraid of that bowl, and you're going to get the opposite effect of what you want.
Yeah, and they might not be afraid of it, but there may be a little bit of doubt in their mind, and sometimes you'll see them take the weave poles, finish it, and then not be quite sure if they can get the food or not. And that's not what you want. I want them to come through those poles blazing, finish them, and dive for that food.
But if you had a helper, you would have the helper pick it up, like well before they got there, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why a helper is an absolute must. But that's why I feel like food, you can use it just like you can a Tug Toy, because when you throw a Tug Toy out there, you'll see people throw Tug Toys out there. The dogs will bypass a jump or cut a sequence off early and head for that toy, and then you're ending up telling them, no, leave it. And, either the dog is self-rewarded or the dog starts to have bad feelings, that sort of thing, and loss of drive. And those are just scenarios that you don't want to have. So unless your dog is very, very well trained and can, drop a toy without loss of drive and that sort of thing, and you need to build up that kind of skill. If you don't have that skill, use an assistant, have someone help you out. They don't need to be an agility person or a dog person. It can be your non-dog sport buddy, spouse, friend, neighbor's kid.
Right. I think the difference there between you running over and telling them they're not allowed to have that food that you just waved in their face and having a helper pick it up is that one is just the reward kind of disappears, and the other one, they're going for it and you're having to correct them in some way. And so that's why that becomes a very negative experience, whereas if they show up and the food bowl is suddenly in somebody's hands and they can't get to it, they're like, what, why can't I have it? But they're not upset about it. And you go back and you start it again. One thing that I've done when I had to work by myself and I wanted the same effect of having the food out in front to create drive and have my dog drive to it is I would take a huge glass jar that used to have some sort of food in it, glass jar with a lid, and I would fill it full of kibble and I would set it right next to the empty bowl at the end of the weave poles. And I'd do the poles, and if they did it right, I would race over, I would unscrew the cap. They can't do anything with this jar. Even the Rottweilers, they can't pick it up and run away with it. They can't crunch into it, nothing. All they can do is stare at it and salivate. And I unscrew the top and I pour some food in and the dog gets it. Now, if they make a mistake, I simply go over, I say, all right, let's try again, get the dog, try it again. There was no negativity there. There was nothing to call them off. They couldn't run away with my big glass jar of food like they could with like those Tug Toys that you can put food in, where they could take it and run with it, and then you would again be in the situation where you're trying to chase them down or tell them to leave it. And so that was something that worked out really well for me if I wanted to have that same effect of the big lure and I didn't have somebody there to guard it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing for that big glass jar. I've tried other food containers, and the Rottweilers just destroy them. I can't tell you how many times that we have bought something new out of Clean Run or from some other place, been very excited about it, used it one time, and on the very first repetition, the Rottweilers broke it or tore it apart.
We're totally not saying anything about Clean Run. This is just what it's like working with Rottweilers. When those Moo Tug things first came out, and everybody thought they were the greatest. And I was going through Tug
What was
Toys like
this? Oh, the milk tug.
Yeah, the milk tug,
Yeah.
the big rubber thing, and they were like, they're indestructible.
That's right.
And they kind of stretch a little, and the dogs were going nuts for them, and apparently they still sort of smell like cow, and everybody loved them. And I was like, oh, this is going to be the best thing ever. I was at a seminar, and I bought one, and at the seminar, like 10 minutes later, Sammy, our Rottweiler, just like popped it in half, tugging with me. that was the end of that Tug Toy. It's just a whole different world when you work dogs with that kind of like power. So nothing against Clean Run, and nothing against those products, but you know, just kind of like how the little dogs have their own set of issues that they have to work around, small stomachs and all of that. With the big dogs, we have our own set of issues. And now we've totally branched away from our topic, but I love what we're talking about. And now I want to talk about the value of the lure. You know, people have, like, the lure has gotten sort of a bad reputation in training, putting something out there that the dog sees right away. But we've always used it for certain things, like you said, the weave pulls, sometimes the contacts, things where we really want to create drive. We want crazy drive on those obstacles. And then when Agility right from the start came out, they kind of codified that. They made it what we were doing sort of naturally, they gave an explanation for. What they would say is that you train everything using both kind of the thinking part of the dog, using essentially shaping or building up behaviors, back chaining, and, you know, all of your sequencing is sort of like that. And then you also teach everything with basically a big fat lure that the dog is going for, and they're thinking less and they're driving more. And that you balance those two, you almost have to teach everything both ways separately, because if a dog has learned to do something with a lure, they can't necessarily do the same thing when they're more thoughtful. Kind of like weave pulls. Some dogs, they can do the weave pulls blazing, but if they get hung up in them a little bit and they get off their rhythm, they actually don't know how to weave not all out, right? So you actually teach everything both ways, and then it all comes together to have a dog that knows what he's doing and does it as fast as they can. So I'm really happy that they kind of brought the lure back into agility training too, with agility right from the start.
Yeah, and if you feel bad about it, calling it a lure, maybe you should just think of it as a target.
Yeah, target. All right, so we got a little bit off topic, but that's okay. Let's move on to our second agility topic for the podcast, which is using a clicker in your agility training.
Well, so I think first, you know, there's clicker training in general, and clicker training has been very, very useful, but it's kind of new, I think, to agility. So even though agility, we're all about positive reinforcement, people don't really use clickers. So, you know, I consider myself a very positive reinforcement kind of person, but it was only very recently under the influence of Sylvia Turkman, who you see in a lot of her videos, has a clicker on her while she's running practice sequences, and she uses it, that I've started using the clicker in my own training, and I think you get better results. So I will tell you that the way I used to do agility, or I guess I still do a lot of this, is, you know, you'll do a sequence and you'll throw out the toy, you'll have your food reward, but at no time are you really marking the performance in a consistent and intentional sort of way. You may be saying, good girl, or good job, or yes, yes, or something like that, but you're not out there with a clicker or a verbal equivalent. And when I have brought the clicker out and done that, I think it takes less repetitions for the dogs to kind of figure out what's going on. So even though you're not shaping in the same way you would a trick, you are shaping over those 10 repetitions or several sessions a performance that you're expecting from your dog. And I think you can start to selectively reward some of those repetitions, and I think a clicker is just a very good thing for that. I think a lot of people don't use the clicker in agility. I would say there's two main reasons. One, it's really hard to use. You know, you only have so many hands. You're holding food. You're holding a toy. You got to hold your dog. You got to stick your hand out to show them where to go, and it's difficult to use the clicker.
I think that's reason 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a really big reason.
Yeah, it is not easy, especially if you're using two toys.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that right now. I think another reason is the person who's kind of set up as the positive trainer in agility that has had a tremendous influence over, I would argue, most of agility, at least here in the United States, is Susan Garrett. And even though she's a positive trainer, what you would call a positive trainer, she doesn't really use a clicker in her agility work, her handling, her sequencing, at least none that I've been exposed to in her seminars, DVDs, and the like. And I think that's had an influence on people as well. But now you have Sylvia Turkman, and she's just click, 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 click. You know, she's clicking everything. And I liked what I saw. I thought her dogs were tremendous. I think her dogs are tremendous. And I've started using it, and I like the results that I've been seeing. So I would encourage people out there who are clicker trainers, take it to the practice field, see what you get, see if your dog is picking up things a little bit quicker.
And it's always going to work better if your dog already knows what that click means. If you've trained a couple of tricks and then you bring it out to the field, I think you'll probably see some really great results. If you just bring a clicker to the field and your dog doesn't really know what it means, you're not going to see those results. I think another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to highlight was you were talking about shaping. And I think that's where we really see the influence of clicker training in agility today in a way that wasn't there 5 or 10 years ago. I think people that used a clicker previously used it in very specific ways, most often with contacts. So they would click when the dog hit the yellow. And that's using the clicker as a marker, but it's not using the clicker to shape anything. And I think now we're seeing the clicker come out as a more powerful tool and using shaping to introduce dogs to obstacles. And I think what you get is a much, much more confident dog. Rather than taking a dog's leash and putting it through a tunnel and, in a sense, forcing them to go through,
or luring them with food or something.
Or luring them with food,
a
right.
toy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a dog that maybe is a little bit scared of that tunnel, I think you get so much better results by taking a little bit longer, shaping the tunnel, and having it be the dog's choice. That would be a very big Susan Garrett thing to say because she's big on choice. But when it's the dog's choice, you get a much, much more confident dog. And I've seen it in training lots of students. The students that take the time to, like a tire is another one that a lot of dogs are really nervous about. And you give that dog just a little bit of shaping and a little bit of opportunity and let them make the choice to go through, and suddenly they're jumping back and forth through the tire with no fear at all. And you may take a dog that you lure and they'll do it, but they just don't get over that fear. So I really do like the shaping for introducing obstacles as well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Most people will use the clicker to introduce obstacles, to teach behaviors like the nose touch. You know, some people may even use it to teach the weave pulls. But when you get out there and your dog is done all the basics, let's say they're running an excellent, people don't use the clicker anymore. They don't bring it out for handling sequences. And I'm saying that when you go out there and you look at the stuff Sylvia's doing, she's got that clicker out there, and she's doing that even with her very experienced advanced dogs. And that's what I'm doing, or that's what I would like to do. And that's what I've started doing, and I'm seeing good results.
And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd love to hear what you think about these topics, as well as ideas for future episodes. You can leave us a comment on Facebook or on the website at baddogagility.com. We also have training articles and videos on the site. We always need new people to introduce the podcast, and you can even win a Bad Dog Agility t-shirt. Just go to the website and look for the big orange button. Happy training!